Hey, I'm Chase Welch. I was in the Marine Corps. I was a 0311 with 16 Charlie Company. That's 1st Battalion, 6th Marines, Charlie Company. I was in 3rd Platoon. So 0311 is an infantryman, so it's a basic infantryman. And I served from 07 to 2011. And really, during that time in the Marine Corps, we were just deploying. So, went through basic training, SOI, which is the Marine Corps School of Infantry, and then immediately dropped to my unit, started to work up. They just gotten back from Iraq, and they were in Ramadi, and so got back, had a lot of good experience with those guys in there, and so we immediately started a workup. Our workup lasted about 7 months, and then we went over and we spent about 10 months, 10 and a half months there on our first deployment. Got back, did another 6-7 month workup, and then spent almost the remainder of my enlistment in Afghanistan for my second deployment. Got back and I left Marine Corps in December of 2010, and then officially EAS, which is end of active service, in January 7th, 2011. Which was I always say it's the best job I ever had. It was a little tongue in cheek. Anybody who spent some time in the military, especially during wartime, there's a lot of pros and cons, of course, probably as there is in any job. But it was definitely formative to my entire life. Definitely got to know myself. There's an old saying that war introduces us to ourselves, and I do think that's true. We got to know ourselves and the guys we were with in a way that you just can't get to know people in any other kind of situation. And you learn a lot about human nature and about what you're willing to do, what you're capable of doing. That old saying of today I did something that yesterday I never would have imagined I was capable of. And in the good and bad sides of people, right? That can be a positive and a negative for sure. Anyway, so that's my time in the military. When I got out of the military, I transitioned into contracting. I was doing training for various government agencies and special mission units. I did that for a number of years, and that was my sort of my experience in the military and government realm. So I said that you get to know people in the military, especially in a combat environment, in ways that I've never found another walk in life where you can get to know people that well, that quickly, and that deeply. And I definitely, I formed friendships there that I'll maintain for the rest of my life. And it doesn't matter if I don't talk to those guys for months, years. Next time I see them or talk to them, it's like no time has passed. And obviously time has passed, people change, life changes. They have, events that happen, and, we try to stay in touch. And it's unfortunately harder than I'd like it to be, because life kind of runs away with us all. But it definitely is a bond that is completely unique, and it never goes away. And even, it being Memorial Day, we're thinking about the guys who died. Those guys have been dead longer than I knew them. There's not a day that goes by you don't think about them, and things that happen remind you of them. It's almost you'll be out and you do something and you see something, you're like, oh, my wife would like that, or my kids would like that, because you know them so well and you think about them all the time. They're a big part of your life, and honestly, those dudes are no different. It's often referred to as a brotherhood, and I think that term maybe gets thrown around a little bit too much in the industry, but in this context, I think it's absolutely true. Like those people become family in a way that oftentimes guys, once they come home and they get out and they try to transition back into civilian life, they all almost feel like they have a closer connection with the guys that they were in with than even their own biological family, which is hard. That's a hard thing to wrap your head around, and it's hard for their families too, because they weren't there and they don't understand, and we have a hard time articulating exactly how we think and feel to people who weren't there, and why we've changed, how we've changed. Often we don't even know the ways we've changed, and that's once you start being introspective about that, and hopefully you can have good dialogue about that with the guys you're in with and with your family, and trying to reintegrate into the civilian world, which is so different. It's a good thing to think about, and it's a lifelong journey of trying to figure out how you fit again. And often we cover these topics, and we cover these hardships with humor, because humor is a great stress reliever. And so the military is known for its dark humor, especially because you're in fairly grievous, dire situations, and the only thing you can do is laugh through it, because getting freaked out about it's not going to help anything. But we carry that over back in the civilian world, and we're making light of things that aren't jokes, and that can be a hard thing for civilians to understand. But it is a coping mechanism for us, and it's like a transitional conversation technique, really, where we're trying to lighten the mood because we don't know exactly how to really talk about all this stuff, especially when it comes to the what we were doing and the guys we lost doing it. See, immediately I want to make a joke about it, because it is a good icebreaker when you're having the conversations that can be hard or awkward or uncomfortable or whatever the case may be. But I think a good way to talk about the things that bother us, whether that was stuff that we saw or things that we did or guys that we lost, you really got to take it case by case. And that's a thing that's unfortunately lost in our modern world, because the pace at which information moves, the pace at which communication happens, and how far and wide we can communicate through digital mediums, we're losing that interpersonal communication where you sit down and you have long conversations with people. But when you do that, you learn how to talk to that person, and you learn how you think and how you talk. It's often said that if thinking is a lower form of prayer, because praying and meditating is one of the highest forms of expression that we have, and a lower form of that would be communication, and then a lower form of that would be writing, and so very few people, and then after that would be reading, and not a lot of people read anymore, and not a lot of people write anymore, and we're losing that conversation. So we're really losing the deeper, more impactful forms of expression that we are capable of as humans. But the way the way that I've found that you can communicate these things to people you want to build those long-term relationships with who don't understand, is you've got to deal with them on an individual level, and you've got to spend the time with them to learn how they can process this kind of information. And obviously you're going to do that differently with your kids than you would do with your siblings or your spouse or your parents or your friends or your coworkers. They're all going to be a case-by-case basis. But what I'd encourage everyone to do is take the time to learn the people, and through that you'll learn about yourself. And that's a journey that hopefully never stops in life, because it's incredibly important. And don't be afraid to get upset about it. Don't run away from your emotions. Emotions are one of the things that make us human. They were given to us for a reason, and they can be detrimental and they can be very positive. And you have to learn how you handle emotion, and then learn how to use that to make yourself better. And you can't be scared of it, even though it can be a very intimidating thing, especially coming from a military background in the combat arms, where there was really no space for that and no need for that. And often the things that happen in war can bring about a lot of negative emotion, which in the moment can have very deleterious effects on an individual's warfighting capability. And so not only is it not really a place for that, but it's often suppressed out of necessity, and it's encouraged socially to be suppressed as well. And so not only do we not learn to process and handle our emotions, but we learn to suppress them instead, which just causes them to come up later and be far more strong and impactful. And often that's dealt with through drugs or alcohol or repression or any combination thereof, and that can lead people down some really dark paths, which has led to another thing we think about on Memorial Day a lot, which is not just the guys who we lost in war, but all the friends we lost once we came home through suicide. Because I mean, all the guys that we lost in 1-6, we lost way more to suicide after, and it's just one of those. It's like a continuing casualty list, even though the war is over, and that can be a really hard thing to deal with, because some of us came from really strong families, some of us came from broken families, some of us came from all walks of life and came together to accomplish that mission. And another thing that wasn't really talked about there is how you're supposed to deal with this. And we realized years down the road that dudes, I was very lucky. I had a very supportive family. I was a great loving wife. I had great kids, and there's no question that some of my issues have caused problems. but they've always been there as a support structure for me, and realizing that a lot of people didn't have that, not only after they got home, but growing up. They never developed any of those coping mechanisms and tools. They didn't have any outlets. And then so you learn that, and then you start the suicide thing. It doesn't ever start to make sense. It's not something that I agree with, but it's something you can kind of get your head around. But it makes it all the more tragic too, because you're on the other side and you see why it's really not necessary. And then again, going back to learning how to talk to people and learning about yourself, is that you never know what a friendly word or checking in with a buddy could do. So that's on Memorial Day, I tend to think a lot about, like, have I been a good friend? Have I been a good brother? Have I been supportive? Have I talked to the people I need to talk to? Have I checked in with them? Do I know what's going on in their lives? And unfortunately, often the answer is no, and that just means I got to redouble my efforts, and I got to do better. Because though our fight in Afghanistan may have been over, the things we were fighting for are eternal, and the people we fought next to and fought for, those are still alive. Like, we got to keep fighting for them. So one of the things that can be a contributing factor to the veteran suicide thing, and I think this is true in the first responder world as well, is war is chaotic. Combat of any kind is chaotic, and it's very fast paced, and often weird things happen that you really can't explain. I'm not arguing there isn't a physics or mathematical explanation for how everything went down, but it often doesn't seem like there is. And very rarely will you ever get an explanation as to why something really happened. And that can cause a lot of people to have that whole survivor's guilt thing. Like, why him and not me? And there's certainly, I can't remember all the times that, like, 100% should have died. I mean, I've stepped on IEDs, I've picked up IEDs by accident. I've been the sole focus of multiple people shooting at me, and they just never hit me. Like, most of the injuries I sustained in combat were either, self-inflicted from being too close to explosions, or backblast from rockets, or falls and that kind of stuff. It was not directly related to actions from the enemy, and that doesn't really make sense. Like, why could I step on a pressure plate and the IED didn't go off? Lots of my friends did get blood. Sure, I can guess at why that happened, right? The explosive chain didn't work. Okay, but that can cause a lot of questions for dudes, and you get stuck in these downward cycles of just trying to figure this out, and because you miss them, because you want an answer. We want the why. The why is one of the most important parts of life for any topic. And when something really negative happens, we often want to know why, and really a lot of times you're just never going to get that answer, and that can seem from an intellectual standpoint a little confusing, because, right, like the old saying, right, like, you make the other guy die for his country, you live for yours. And that's the goal, right? We went there to not die, and yet when people do start dying, you're wondering why it was them and not you. And I definitely had friends who have struggled with that, and still to this day struggle with that, because it's confusing. A buddy of mine was in a fighting position with the dude, and they're both returning fire to the enemy, and that guy took a round to the head, and he didn't. 2 feet from each other. Like, why? That's something that he struggles with to this day. He just doesn't get it. I don't have an answer either. I'm glad he's still alive, and I miss the guy who died every day. As much as I care about the why, and as much as I believe it's a super important question to ask, I can say that if it's a question you're never going to get an answer to, then you just have to be okay with the fact that is how it is. And what you do is you find new purpose in your life. That's a big struggle. Especially I think on Memorial Day for veterans, is, am I living a life that is worthy of the sacrifices I witnessed? You know, am I worth it? That's a hard question to answer. And it's, I think the only way we can ever answer that is to never give up. And that's why I think the suicide thing bothers me so much, because it is kind of giving up. You know, and that was never something we were taught. It was never something we were told to do, right? You never give up. You just gotta rededicate yourself to that purpose of living constantly for a higher purpose and being better every day. Because that's what, I mean, think about it, right? Like, that have been you dead, you'd want your brothers to go on and do better because you love them. No different than we want better for our kids than we had. All of the politics of war aside, most of us went there for ideological reasons, trying to make the world a better place. Hopefully. And there's a lot of questions of whether or not we were successful there. But what we can do, regardless of how things went down in the war, what we can do is really dedicate ourselves to that now that we're home, and focusing on making our lives better, our families' lives better, our communities' lives better, maybe if we're lucky, even our nation better. And that's really the only thing I've been able to figure out to deal with the whole reason of why we're still here. It's because we have more work to do. No, I wouldn't change a thing, because it's not that I don't have regrets in my life. Like, I've definitely done things I wish I hadn't done. That's true all the way back from when I was a kid to, mistakes I made in my life, and mistakes in the military. Like, there's no question that there were war is chaotic, and unfortunately people died that probably didn't need to, and that's always a tragedy. But it is what it is, and war is chaotic, and you can't always control that. Like, innocent people die, but I wouldn't change. Honestly, I wouldn't change the way things went. Like, it's made me who I am, and ultimately I can take those lessons. Again, that whole idea of like never giving up, and working to make things better. I can use every one of those lessons, every one of those mistakes, and I can pass that on. Hopefully, I can pass that on to my children. Hopefully, through conversation and friendships, I can pass it on to the people I know, and using this kind of medium, I can pass it on to who knows how many people. And I couldn't have done that if things had been different. Yeah. There's a lot of good moments. A lot of them are not. Wouldn't be allowed on the internet anymore. But there are definitely moments of victory and triumph, which are gratifying. There's moments where we're just being ridiculous. I remember one time when you're in enough gunfights, you can get a sense of what they're like. And some of them are very serious, and some of them it kind of feels like everyone's just phoning it in that day. And it was one of those days where the Taliban was just really kind of phoning it in, and we all knew it. So it didn't last very long, 20 minutes or something. And gunfights have tempos too, very much like music. And so, we could tell it was coming to an end. And I don't remember who said it, but we realized, somebody said, like, we've never done combat roles. And so we're like, yeah, it's true. We've never done combat roles. Now's our chance. So, I don't know, 4 or 5 Marines are just out we were all taking cover behind this building. We were actually getting like actively engaged. And now it's sort of one of those, they're shooting at us, but they don't really mean it. So I said they're kind of phoning it in. So we just all decided to go out and do combat roles and try to stand up and shoot our guns. And, everyone breaks out the cameras, and it's just it totally ridiculous. I mean, if you were to tell someone back in the States who hasn't ever experienced this, like, I was literally playing around in a gunfight. They'd be like, that would be horrified. Like, what are you doing? They're shooting at you. I mean, that could kill you. And you're like, yeah, but it's not going to. It's fine. It's probably fine. So we did ridiculous things like that, and there's moments of interpersonal victory, like poignant moments where I was able to make a good decision and help out the dudes I was with, and that definitely we come to mind. There was a near ambush that we got stuck in, and I was up front and took cover in this wadi, and there's a Taliban dude laying down in the wadi, because they knew what they were doing. They knew that was the only cover we could seek. The way we spread out in the field we were moving through, it just turned out that I was far enough ahead of everybody else that I was the only guy there for about 30 seconds before everyone else sort of piled in. And that would have been a real bad day if that dude had gotten some rounds off on a bunch of dudes in what is essentially a shallow trench. And so that was sort of a surprise gunfight I was able to win, which, at the time I didn't think about it, right? But that dude was like 15 feet from where everyone would have piled in. So that was, looking back, like that's a gratifying moment where if I hadn't noticed him, because he was fairly well concealed in some dried poppy, he probably could have killed our entire squad. Yeah, but that also plays back to one of those things, like that dude had me dead to rights. Like I did not see him at first. And so I don't know why I ended up winning. Glad I did. But there's moments like that. And then there's just, Afghanistan's a beautiful country. Like it is shockingly, just heart-wrenchingly beautiful at times. And so there's just some great memories of, hanging out with dudes on rooftops during sunsets or sunrises, looking out over poppy fields and looking at the mountains. And it is still wild. And it's not the kind of environment that a lot of people get to experience. There's not a lot of places left you can go. There are some in the United States where you can still go and see that kind of like truly wild country. But there's definitely some good and bad memories there for sure, but are all, like I said, but all of those have their use. Like I said, I wouldn't change any of that. One piece of advice for veterans on Memorial Day. Well, first off, I would be cautious about giving advice. Like I don't think I've got anything really figured out, and I don't know how wise I really am. So, take everything I say with a grain of salt. But we are charged to make it worth it. Those dudes who gave their last full measure, that's why we say like their watch is ended. They can't do anything anymore here, right? Within the physical world that we inhabit, but they can inspire us, and we should take that inspiration, and we have to make their sacrifice worth it. And that is a hard thing to wrap your head around. That's a hard thing to do, and it's a hell of a task. And it's something that I struggled with for years. Like when I got out, I stopped exercising. I stopped really keeping up on my personal training. I stopped. I felt like I had completely lost my purpose and my mission, and it took years. That is something I have to work on every day. And I don't think I'll ever stop having to work on that. Like I don't know if I'll ever totally internalize this, but I believe it's true. Is that we have to make their sacrifice worth it. We owe them everything. And it's not just the dudes I was with. I mean, this is true since people bled to make us a nation. I mean, those dudes, they were fighting for, you want to talk about fighting for an idea. We have a foundational physical example hundreds of years on of what we're supposed to be fighting for. They were just fighting for a concept, a system of government that had never really been tried before. I don't even know how many of those guys fully understood all that. I mean, we owe all of them. And they set the example, and they showed us what dedication is, and they showed us what sacrifice is, and we have to make their sacrifice worth it. Because I can't imagine anything more selfish or disrespectful than turning our backs on that now. And we're still here, and we're here for a reason. So we got to stay committed to the foundational principles of the nation, to the reasons that we went to war in the first place, not the reasons that politicians said we went to war, the reasons we went to war. And you got to find what you can do now, right? That mission is going to be different for every dude because we all have different capabilities, different strengths and weaknesses. But if you dedicate yourself to the idea that I am going to make the sacrifices of all those who went before me worth it, and I will continue to stand in the gap. You can choose your own gap to stand in, but find one. Stand in it. and teach your kids to stand in it with you.